Okay, let's start with introductions. I'll go first. Darren Canaparoli, Public Works Director.
Eric Butler, Gladstone Parks and Recreation Board.
Kim Baller, citizen of Gladstone.
Sandy Ditmar, Gladstone resident.
Jackie Betts, City Administrator.
Brittany Oxford, Community Assistance Forester in the Urban and Community Forestry Program at ODF.
Okay, so first on the agenda is a recap of the City Council work session that was held last Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays ago. So we presented the ordinance to council. They were, to be honest with you, pretty excited or seemed to be very excited. They did have some thoughts as to some things to add or suggestions on a few items that were within that. Jackie has, in the packet that we provided you here, there is a red line section of that of ads. One of the ads was we had an arborist in there. They thought it would be nice to have an ISA arborist in there, so we added that definition to that.
So what do you guys think about removing arborist as a definition and just using ISA arborist? Or do you want both of them there?
I would think just ISA and leave the other out so there isn't less complicated.
Okay. Brittany, you're okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the language is ISA certified arborist, but I
Okay.
think that that's great.
Hi, Nancy. We'll let the record show that Nancy Eichstad is joining the meeting.
Sorry I'm late. I was at the community park.
No problem. Just started going over the recap from the city council work session, and we were on the first page of the ordinance. So we're going to strike through arborist and we're going to add certified under ISA certified arborist.
Next was under tree care. What was brought up with that is if, you know, if there's a natural, because in this, it has a time frame within it, like 30 days, I believe it is, to be able to make the correction of if the tree is broken or anything like that, that where the tree would need to come down. One of the main question is what do we do in the event of an emergency such as the ice storm that we had not too long ago? And it takes longer to, you know, to get that removed. Obviously, when that happened, there was, you know, weeks and months before everything come down. So we wanted to add the last little sentence there that says direction shall be given in the event of an emergency or natural disaster. Basically giving people time to be able to do that on a case by case basis. If it's a mass issue like we had with the ice storm, we're not going to expect them to be able to clean that up in a 30-day period. It's the reality is getting somebody out to be able to do that work. 30 days is not gonna, there's no way they'll be able to do that in a 30-day span. So we wanted to have some language in there that we could expand that in the case of an emergency.
It seems fine to me. I don't have any objection to that.
Did you want to say 90 days? Is that reasonable? I mean, at some point,
Well, I think it's kind of on a case by case basis. If I know that when the ice storm, we as the city had problems getting a tree service out to take care of our trees and have issues like that because they were so backed up with everything else. And to be honest with you, it was well over 90 days before they were able to make it to do our stuff. And we're one of their normal customers. So I think that there needs to be some discretion there. By putting a date of 90 days, then if it doesn't happen, then what do we do? So I think we stick with the 30 and then just add the caveat of, you know, in emergency circumstances.
Yeah, I put this language in here, but after I was thinking about it, I thought maybe it should say the director may apply discretion because you don't want to give that discretion to a property owner.
Right.
So maybe we need to add the director may apply discretion in the event of an emergency or natural disaster.
Yeah, that was gonna be my suggestion.
Okay,
Jackie.
great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then under tree pruning, we had a comment here, need confirmation from Brittany on the ANSI page, well, I'm not sure what page of the ordinance it is, 4 of the ordinance. Under tree pruning number 2.
Yeah, let me move. I'll have to find the right ONSI number. I think the one that's referenced is a safety standard.
So are you going to send us something on that then, Brittany, as far as what the correct number should be there then?
Yeah, and I can look through the whole draft and just confirm that all of the referenced ONSI numbers are correct.
Okay.
So I'm wondering in that particular instance, say you've just planted a tree and the tree is growing and you're wanting to say cut the lower limbs. So it's going to be able, so people are going to be able to walk under it without hitting their head and walking into branches and stuff like that. Does that standard also apply in that particular instance of pruning?
Well, that would be considered pruning. I mean,
Sure.
any way you look at it, so.
But I mean, is that guideline in the standards about how to,
There,
I just don't know what the standard,
sure.
what it is, you know, does it say this is how you cut a branch or, you know, how detailed is it?
Yeah,
know,
so
Brittany?
the American National Standards, I forget what the I stands for, but the pruning guidelines should cover best management practices when it comes to pruning trees. So that'll be like, well, one, I think in this particular instance, it'll probably mention that you should have pruned in the first year of planting. Clearance pruning will probably be mentioned. Once we have the correct number, I can share it with the group so we can look at it if you want. But it should cover all things pruning, best management practices.
Okay, thanks.
So maybe it would be helpful that once we have that complete, to have that link on our page too, so people could go there to see what the standards are. Okay.
So the next is under removal of trees, number 3. There was discussion as to the caliper of the tree. Originally, it had a 3-inch caliper in there. When we made edits to this, we moved it down to a 2 because that seemed to be what the consensus was. But I know that Brittany, you were gonna check and see what would be best for that.
Yeah, I talked with our team and we sort of came to the consensus that 1.5 is actually a better caliper inch to suggest for a minimum planting size based on conversations we've had with other cities and their experience with the ordinance.
So
But-
what if someone plants something smaller than that? Is that
Yeah,
gonna be a
so-
problem?
Yeah, so I think in this ordinance is saying that street trees cannot be planted smaller than 1.5 caliper inch, which I think is good practice.
Can we go back to number 2? Where it says removed with a tree recommendation in the tree list. Should that be recommendation or should the word be required rather than recommendation?
How do you want that to say?
Well, if you read that, it says removed with a tree recommendation in the street tree list. If I was Joe Gladstone, I might read that as, well, this is a bunch of trees they recommended, but I could plant what I want.
I see what you're saying.
So maybe add the, with a tree
Approved, maybe.
approved or,
Be listed on the approved list or something.
Okay. So the next section is under removal of stumps, or after the removal of stumps, excuse me, is the tree permit process. So we talked about this. We don't want to use a right-of-way permit for this. We would create a tree permit that is completely separate from that. We will want the people to, if they're removing the tree, they need to have a permit. If they're planting a tree, they need to have the permit. And the whole idea, especially on the planting side of it, is so we know what they're putting in the ground so that we know what trees are out there. Because eventually at some point, we're going to have an inventory of trees. And I mean, you got to start somewhere. At least at this point, we'll know what has been planted from here on out. So I think the permit would be free. There would be no fee for any of that. But any stump removal, any of that stuff, they would need to get a tree removal permit or a tree planting permit.
So once they have the permit, would that generate a review of the area so that we know they're not digging through some kind of underground utility or, so that would go through? Well,
So,
great
so
minds.
they would, to dig anything, they need to have locates called 811. And then it was suggested by Sandy that maybe we put that on the actual tree permit so that when they go to get the tree permit, we can let them know that they need to call 811 for locates, and then we'll know what the underground utilities are in that area.
Okay. I'm envisioning the burden on city staff for all of that, so make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we get locates daily, so it's not, as far as locating, it's not that cumbersome for us, so we would go out, we'd mark our stuff that's in the right of way, and then gas, power, communications, all that stuff would then get located for that. So then everyone would know what's in the ground.
Yeah, it's a good service. I use it a lot.
So I had a question just for the general committee. So if someone wanted to plant some tall upright trees as a screen, for example, like using arborvitae, which is pretty common, or, Italian cypress or something that's eventually going to get tall, that's not under a power line, and say it's on their own property, it's on their side of the sidewalk. Is the tree ordinance going to have any effect on that, of them planting something that's eventually going to be a dense, tall, thick screen?
No, because it would be on private property. As long as it's outside of the right of way,
Sure.
it wouldn't make a difference. But what somebody would need to think about that is if it starts encroaching on the right of way, meaning the sidewalk or something like that,
Right.
they would be responsible for
Pruning.
trimming that, pruning
Sure.
that to make sure that it
Mhm.
has a clear path. And then not only that too, the clear vision comes into effect there depending on, where it is. As far as
Not on the
signage,
corner.
signs and on the
Yeah.
corners and everything like that. So,
Mhm.
but technically that's on or private property. So it wouldn't be,
Okay.
this ordinance wouldn't cover that.
And by the same, is there any kind of restriction on, because someone could plant, say, a redwood. And is there anything in the ordinance that's going to prohibit extremely tall trees?
It would depend on if it's going to encroach on utilities. such
That would be
as-
the only consideration then.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, I think that's where the regional or the recommended approved street tree list will come into play into the ordinance.
Well, yeah, but I think he's referring to private property, not public.
Oh, yeah, that's different.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that in the health strip for sure.
No. Anything else on that? Okay, so the next is under the violations and penalties. This has been a topic that we've discussed here multiple times. Brittany has sent some language that other cities are using. What I noticed with a lot of these is a couple things. A lot of them don't really talk about what a dollar amount is for a fine. I believe the only one that I saw that in was the city of Corvallis. It's in this packet too, by the way. But the rest of them, one thing I did like about a lot of these is it talks about, it's not one fine for all trees, it's one fine per tree. So let's say you had 3 trees in your planter strip and you come in and cut all those down, you would end up being fined for each individual tree, not just one fine to cover all of them. I thought that was some good language that was in, I think almost all of them except for the Corvallis, and it may even have been in that one. But none of it really talked about what the, a dollar amount that's determined with those fines or violations. Is there anything you want to add to that, Brittany?
I noticed that too. I think just looking at these and one of the community assistance foresters on our team, when I was talking to her about this, was the urban forester for the city of Corvallis. So I was talking to her a lot about like what the implementation of their language for this was, and she said it was justifiable and worked really well in a lot of scenarios. What I like about their language is that they have the like set, fine amount, but then they put in that sort of buffer flexibility that if an entire tree is removed, then you can have an appraisal and the fine can be up to the amount of the sort of appraised value of that tree that's removed. So it's like $500, or if an entire tree is removed, the value of the tree. So that's something that I liked in their language.
Yeah, I noticed that the others in here are bigger than our ordinance itself.
Yeah.
And I had circled Corvallis as a starting point because I did like that we could get the appraised value and that there's guidelines for how to go about and get that. So I was leaning towards Corvallis.
One thing I noticed is that our draft ordinance lists an illicit tree removal as a misdemeanor, and all of these indicate them as being civil violations or infractions.
In the interest of encouraging more planting of trees, I would be in favor of, instead of a fine, that people be required to plant 2 trees in place of every tree that they cut, every single tree that they cut down.
I would advocate against that as a policy, just because not, it's not a 1-for-1 replacement in a lot of the situations that end up happening. Like if you were to remove a 30 diameter inch Oregon white oak and then replace it with a new tree or even 2 new trees, the value of that canopy and all of those other ecosystem services are not gonna come into account for a
Right,
long
but
time.
how are you gonna assess the value of a white oak that large also?
With someone who's certified to appraise the value of that tree. So like, it's sort of like a discouragement for developers to just cut through street trees and then pay the $500 because it's a sort of drop in the bucket for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody's gonna read this ordinance before they cut down a tree. If they're gonna cut down, they're gonna say, well, I'm not gonna cut down that tree because I'm gonna get fined. They're gonna look and see what they think the value is, and I mean, people cut down trees for different reasons, and so, I mean, I seriously doubt that you could put a value on a 150-year-old oak tree, of what its actual value is worth, because there's a lot of intrinsic value that's not monetary as well. So, I don't see how I just don't see how that's gonna really discourage people from cutting down a tree. It's to find them after they've already cut it down, but I don't see that there's any incentive to not cut a tree down in that.
Well, if they get the permit, they can cut it down.
Yeah, right. It's like if you go
So-
through the proper permitting channels and then you're approved to remove that tree by the director, whoever is sort of acting.
Right. This is a violation, not
Yeah, so that's sort of the discouragement. right
permitted.
there.
So Brittany, is there a cost to somebody assessing the value of the tree after it's cut down, and who would pay for that?
So I think it's the person who violated the ordinance would incur that cost, but in most contractors, they won't. Well, it depends on the contractor, but some of them will charge you for that, some of them won't.
Trees get appraised value gets appraised all the time, like insurance companies
Yeah.
need to get it. So, I'm not familiar with what the system is, but I know it happens a lot. And I've taken calls for something this size, what is it worth? I've done that. But there is a process for it.
And they can do it over the phone. They don't have to come out.
Maybe the tree burned up.
Yeah.
Fire.
Oh.
Someone runs it through a chipper right away to hide the evidence.
So Eric, to your point, if we are amending the violations and penalty section, we would take out the guilty of misdemeanor language and use more of what we're inserting from an example that we have here.
I mean, I'm not familiar enough with the justification either way for the decision about a misdemeanor versus violation, but it's kind of whatever makes sense proportionally.
I also, because one of our committee members is not here, Linda Cosgrove, she did submit some comments. So for the record, in regards to this section, she says that no one should be fined. So I wanted to make sure that we've got that out. And we probably want to read all of her comments into the record at some point, Darren.
Yeah.
So I had a question. Say if someone on the strip between the curb and the sidewalk, say there was a tree of heaven growing there. And, you know, I consider that a noxious tree, and I think a lot of people do. So if somebody cuts that down without a permit, they're actually kind of doing the community a favor by doing that. Are they still going to be fined for cutting down a noxious tree?
Can't we make an exception for known noxious trees because they're documented? It's not like an opinion about that tree. I mean, I would think we would just,
Well, the permit is free anyway, so there's no reason not to. It's still good to get a record that this has happened, even if it's the right, take out the right kind of tree for the right reasons. I think it's still
Right, but I'm
good to
talking
have.
about a fine, not the permit.
So the language in Corvallis does say fine not to exceed $500. That doesn't mean that every infraction is going to be the same fine. I think that's sort of up to the discretion of who's issuing these fines. But I agree. I think it should be, it's good practice to apply for a permit even in a situation of a noxious plant, because then you can track what's being removed and why in the city.
I think there was something in one of these different cities that talked about making your case after the fact. And that, you know, something like that certainly would. I'm not finding it right away here, but I did read that.
And the last paragraph in the draft ordinance is an appeals process as well.
I think in Wilsonville, they have a retroactive permitting process highlighted. That might be what you're referencing.
So under removal of trees, under letter F, it talks about private property owners have the duty at their expense to remove or treat nuisance trees on their property. So with that, it kind of covers the nuisance portion of it. If that tree's deemed a nuisance, then it can be removed.
Well, wouldn't any tree of heaven be deemed a nuisance?
If it's listed as a nuisance tree, yeah.
I don't know.
it's on the noxious tree list. So I would think you don't have to do anything special.
Do you think the idea of a retroactive permit does make sense if it's in kind of an emergency situation, like a perfectly healthy tree suddenly tips over or something like that? So if there ends up being a situation where you have to remove a tree for hazard purposes where you don't have the ability to plan for it, that might be one of those discretion of the director things, or It wouldn't be the kind of situation where you could just cut down a tree and then afterwards say, hey, was this okay? Are we cool?
Anybody have any more on this?
Actually, in getting the permit, can someone get that online? They'll be able to do that.
Yeah, it'll be online. It's no different than our right-of-way permit is
Okay.
currently, so it's online. You can fill out and submit it.
Great, thanks.
So all of that it'd be the exact same process as the right-of-way permit, but with a lot less, hoops to jump through, so to speak. So thoughts on penalties? I like the not to exceed $500 per tree. I mean, like Brittany said, it could be less than that depending on what we're talking about too. I mean, if it's a small caliber tree or something like that, that doesn't warrant that type of a fine, then it can be reduced. But if you're looking at a max of 500 per tree, that's, that's kind of what we had talked about before was the fine. I think the fine before was like $300 and everyone said, well, that seems really low. And at least this one's at $500 and it does say per tree. So if you have somebody comes in and takes out multiple trees in the planting strip, then they're going to get hit with each tree.
So do you want to do $500 or appraised value of the tree and then leave it up to them to find the appraised value somewhere?
Appraised value on any established tree is going to be more than 500.
So appraised value would take care of it?
That could be thousands.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we're willing to subject Gladstone residents to that much.
I think that that is more
fine.
intended for developers.
Brittany, I can't, can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, so I think that that language about the appraised value is really just trying to cover all possible situations here. So if it's just a homeowner and they, do something on accident or they remove a tree, you could use the discretion of the $500 or less depending on what the violation looks like. But the appraised value just gives you that flexibility to where if a developer came in and removed a lot of really large street trees and they were just like, oh, $500, that's no big deal. Whereas the appraised value could be upwards of $1,000 per tree. That would be a disincentive for them to do that. Does that make sense?
It does, but it also seems like we're crossing over with land use development code versus public tree ordinance. And so that's what a lot of these cities, why they have such comprehensive language, because a lot of it does have to deal with development.
Mhm.
So that's why it's helpful for this group to decide, do you want to do an amount not to exceed for an infraction, or do you want to do an appraised value? It gets back to what Sandy said, is that it's not likely that we're going to be able to collect thousands of dollars from somebody for this.
So just to be clear, in Corvallis's language, it says or the appraised value. So it gives you the option of fines. It's not saying that every time it'll be the appraised value.
But there's also the idea of having an appraised value. So say the value of the tree is appraised at $10,000, for example, and the homeowner can't really afford to pay that, that there is an appeal process where the homeowner can request a hearing, and maybe they could iron out a lesser a lesser fee, something that the homeowner could afford, but still would make them aware of how serious of infraction the city, feels that that is.
Or maybe kind of along what Brittany's talked about, kind of have that or, but also sort of clarify the why that decision would be made. It's like the appraised value would only apply under certain circumstances, like if it's associated with a development permit or something like that, whereas as opposed to simply removing a tree or something. Or kind of create a specific circumstance where the appraised value of the tree would be necessary as a deterrent, but not have that be the default.
I'm not real happy with the word or, because say, for example, you said it was used to in development. So say somebody's gonna put in a parking lot and they're cutting down a bunch of trees, and the city decide, and the trees, the value of the trees is very high that they cut down. And the city decides to go for the lesser fine of $500 rather than the actual cost, the value of the trees. And people saying, well, they made a deal with the city or the city employee to charge that lesser amount.
Well, Brittany, I don't see the or in Corvallis's language. Can you help me see where that's at? I read it as in addition to.
I think what we
Yeah.
mean, I think what we mean by the or is that it simply describes two different fee circumstances or two different fines without describing the logic behind applying one or the other. So I think just having something clarifying clarifying where you just have the $500 fine or whatever amount we choose versus the in addition, the
Right.
base fine plus the in addition to. Because right now, the in addition to, without having a description of why that would be applied, it feels arbitrary.
So if you're looking at just the first three sentences of Corvallis, that's kind of where I put my break there at the end of provision of this chapter. Basically, what that's saying is that it's a fine not to exceed $500 per tree.
So the language that I'm referencing where I'm saying or is just because the sort of appraised value is built in here to give the city a little bit more flexibility. And the language is in the event that a tree or trees are damaged, destroyed, or wrongfully removed, the appraised value of the plant may be additionally applied to this penalty. That doesn't mean that it is additionally applied, but it can be.
And I guess my point is it's just not clear from this description under what circumstances it would be applied.
Correct.
Great. So that could be something that you clarify. I'm just giving this to you as an option. You know, whatever works for Gladstone. But in conversations with urban foresters, specifically in Corvallis, they added this language later for a reason.
Yeah, our first draft of this did include the $500 fine. Then we changed it to the appraised value of the tree. And one of the comments at the council work session was that we needed to define the penalty section further. So that's kind of what our charge is for this section right here.
I'm liking the Corvallis terminology. $500 a tree, but we might add on to that the appraised value. And to get into who makes the rules about that, you can do that with many, many sections of the draft. So it's the city manager or authorized rep at their discretion. And I think you have to trust your government staff to act appropriately, or you got a different problem to deal with.
I think it's hard for us to try to figure out if we want this to be exact or to give flexibility, since these are rules we're coming up with here. There's a part in Lake Oswego I like where it says the person has committed a previous violation of the provision. If you got somebody that's done this before, that could be taken into account as part of the penalty as well. And so if you're going to have flexibility, that could be one of the bullet points.
And 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah, you don't get any more trees. But this is hard, you know, writing collaboratively is really hard stuff to do. So I guess we just need to agree on some basic concepts and then try to AI it or try to write it out and then see what we come up with. Is that where we're going, Jackie?
Yes, and what I'm understanding is that we do like the not to exceed 500 language. Do we also want to add the appraised value with the discretion of the appropriate person, or do you just want to use a dollar amount?
I like using the appraised value as well.
Yeah, I do too. It makes people aware of what trees have value.
Okay, and then the other point I was going to make, I do like the idea of saying fines shall be paid into the parks budget and allocated to urban tree canopy, something to that nature. We could modify that language, but if we agree that that's where the money should go.
Don't we need some sort of accounting for the tree budget anyway? Is that
Yes.
a name for whatever
That
that is?
instead of it just going into the general fund, I
Right.
think that if we had language that said it would be allocated to the parks budget and then it would come out of that line item for trees.
I like that too.
And I also circled the previous violation of a provision to take that into account. So I think we have enough guidance to maybe massage that language further. And what about retroactive permit? Did we also want some of that language in there? My only comment was that it says that you'll pay a triple permit fee, and if ours is free, I'm not sure how we do that.
You're gonna get free 3 times.
I think you could have a retroactive permit that doesn't cost anything, just so that they don't incur a violation fee. but
They
you
just have to do
outline-
one, so
Yeah.
Yeah, I
we'll
think-
add that in there.
I think again, if that's at the discretion of the director, that's probably
Yeah.
the best, most sensible thing. Something I noticed in the Happy Valley ordinance is that there's also under item number 9, that there's a penalty for contractors who conduct an illegal or an illicit tree removal. Not sure if that's something we want to get into, but it's
think-
What, number 9 under Happy Valley,
Yep.
Eric?
Yeah.
any arborist, landscaper, contractor, tree service that has performed any tree removal in violation of the section or submitted a falsified report in connection with any tree removal or application for any tree removal covered by the section should not be considered a responsible bidder for any city contracts for a period of 5 years from the date of violation.
But with that, that doesn't mean that the public couldn't hire that individual. That's just saying the city wouldn't hire that company or individual.
Wilsonville also says, the city shall require the property owner to replace illegally removed or damaged trees. The city may also require a combination of payment and tree replacement. It's also says will replace with trees of similar size and species for the ones that were illegally removed.
Well, you couldn't really do size. I mean, if somebody takes out a big tree, you can't put a big
So-
one, but
Yeah.
Or
I
like,
think what
or
they
like if
mean by
you
that is,
illegally
like-
remove a tree that's too big for the space and then you can't replace it with something that's in contravention of the size requirements.
No, I was just gonna say that I think the size requirement is like, you can't replace like an oak with a dogwood, for example. So even though it's not the same size when you plant it, it eventually will get to that size. But that is sort of an issue, because if you remove a large form tree and then you're required to replant a large form tree, it can't go in that space because it was improperly planted there in the first place. There's a lot of nuances to that specific requirement.
Yeah, I
to
think
think-
just
to
having,
think through.
I think just having the fines go into the city urban forestry fund is effective mitigation.
And it looks like most cities do that. Yeah, they have that.
Anything else on this?
Maybe the ordinance isn't the place for it, but has the city done anything about the oak savanna of our town? And how unique those oak trees are, and maybe how to care for them and things like don't water in the summer, that sort of stuff. Has anything like that ever happened in the city?
Not to my knowledge.
so Darren, I sent you a link to some language about that for the website and I didn't see it up
Yeah,
there.
we haven't got it up there yet, but yes, he did send me a link. for
So
that.
there's a Wikipedia site that talks about it in a really comprehensive way. It wouldn't go in the ordinance, you know.
Okay. So next is the community engagement survey.
Yeah, and really it's already out there, so I don't think there's anything we need to do to it. I printed a final copy for all of you. It has a QR code on the website, Survey Monkeys on the website. This will be at the city's booth at the festival tomorrow. There we go. We did receive one comment from an elected official that thought the open-ended questions may be too expansive and we may not get a lot of answers, but we went ahead and kept it as is. We also are doing a drawing for a local $25 gift card to try to incentivize people that want to apply. It's in the newsletter for August. So this is ready to go. You want to read Linda Cosgrove's comments into the record?
Just read through them all.
Yep.
So from Linda Cosgrove, she says, "Good morning to the tree committee. I'm unable to come today, so this is my position. Participation by occupying homeowner is on a voluntary basis. No one should be fined. Landlords who run a business in the residential area should cover all expenses and pay all bills. If people would like to fill their parking strip with rocks to avoid the water bills, should be allowed to do so. All planting materials should be available within a mile of their homes. This committee is not here to earn money for nurseries or landscapers. The city should have a tree giveaway every November or December and give the homeowners who plant in the parking strip a discount on their water bills for at least 2 years. All money acquired by the city should be returned directly to the homeowners." So next on the agenda, granted, we're running out of time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, maybe we can just call this and have for the next meeting, begin the updating of the tree species list for Gladstone. There's a copy of that in the packet that we provided you. This is the same list that was, on the website that we removed. I think it was, pretty well received that nobody liked that list. It's very outdated, which we all know. No, this is actually the list that Gladstone currently has. That is very outdated, which is a lot of the reason why we pulled it from the website so that it wasn't there. So, I mean, I know that we had put several links on the website for different tree lists, things like that. A lot of people seem to like the Clackamas County list, not to say that that's the end all, but I think we need to start thinking of the trees that we need to be putting on that list. Brittany, you had a question?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that I sent over a draft regional tree list that was recently developed with my program and a bunch of municipal and other urban forestry professionals for the state, which might be a good place to start for recommended urban trees west of the Cascade Range. That's going to be found on pages 1 through 3. So that might be a potential starting point.
Brittany, is that something you just sent?
I think I sent it in a few previous meetings, but I can resend it to you, Jackie, or
Yeah, why don't you send it to me and we can get it out to the group so before our September meeting, everyone's had time to review that.
great.
And do we need some language that can make exceptions for areas in the nature park that none of this would apply to? Do other cities have nature park sections in their tree code? So
Yeah,
that,
so some cities have, so I think this would specifically be a street tree list. So anything planted in the right of way along streets. And then they'll have like a park tree list and then a natural area list. So there's different ways that folks break it up depending on.
Yeah, but I'm
where-
talking about regulation as well. So like if we're saying a tree has to come down here because it's XYZ, but a tree like that would be okay in a natural area like Rainierson or the nature park. How do we capture that in this document? And I'm thinking other cities have the same situation. So maybe we need to kind of check around.
And maybe even just a paragraph that says like trees in undeveloped natural areas can be managed at the discretion of the director or something like that, or some kind of exemption that really only trees that kind of present a direct hazard to life and limb.
And as far as people coming up with a list of recommended trees, just to let everybody know, I'm sort of thinking along the lines of looking at bioregions rather than native plants versus, non-native plants that from other regions that have a similar climate to us or have a climate now that we will be going to be having in the future. Thinking of those trees as recommended on our list.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Sandy. So for the next meeting, I think we'll print out the lists that are on the website. We'll have the documents that Brittany was referring to. I think we'll get all of that out in advance so that when we meet in September that we have kind of hit the ground running, I guess is probably the best way to put that.
That's on the 6th.
September 6th,
Be the first Friday of the month. I don't have
Yeah.
the calendar with me.
it's the 6th.
Okay. Groovy.
All right. Well, with that, we can call the meeting. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Have a good
you.
weekend.